Brilliant. Well, a warm welcome to you as well. If you joined us during the worship, you're at Anchor Church this afternoon. Great to have you here. It's always the point where someone might just lag it because they're like, I thought I was coming to something totally different. But you are at Anchor Church today. And we want to begin just by getting you to imagine and remember the best meal out you've ever had. Best meal out you've ever had. Where were you? Picture the scenes, picture the smells. What did you eat? Who were you with? A few couples nudging each other. Did you get the same one? I've got a few I could have said today, but the one I wanted to talk about was me and Lydia, my wife. We were bought a meal out when we lived in Bristol. Now I was studying and Lydia at the time wasn't working, and so we were always completely broke, and so we never ate out. Like we didn't go for coffee, nothing like that. And so someone bought us this lovely gift of a meal out at the Bristol Lido. Has anyone been there, just out of interest? Yes, okay, which is a lovely place. And so we went on a rather cold evening. It's got an outdoor heated pool. And so we went for a swim before our meal. It started snowing whilst we were swimming. So snow's coming down, outdoor heated pool, sauna, and then went up into the restaurant and had this delicious meal with some kind of amazing like pheasant, great wine. It was just, you know when everything just comes together really right. Here it is, in fact. So here is the Bristol Lido. And so we had our meal overlooking the pool. It just felt like a very, very wholesome evening. Now, I want you to contrast that with your kind of regular scene of a family meal. You might want to think about like back home for Christmas kind of thing. You might want to think about your dinner table in the evening. You might want to think about your table community. And you've got something really quite different. You normally have something much more noisy, right? Much more chaotic, a lot more messy, probably a bit less classy, but there's also something just beautifully real about it as well. And I want to kind of just hold these two visuals really before us today. The restaurant kind of meal versus the family kind of meal as an image. It's like an image of what church community could be before us, because there's a really stark difference between these two things. You see, at the restaurant, we go as a consumer. We go to be served, we go to be fed, we expect luxury. We'll probably leave a bit of feedback on TripAdvisor at the end, right? 4-star, 5-star, how did it go? Whereas at a family meal, we don't go as a consumer. We don't walk to the table and say, okay, I'd like the pheasant this evening, please, and a bottle of your finest house red. We don't do that stuff, but we chip in. We lay the table. We load the dishwasher at the end. We pass the salt. We have conversation and life and family whilst we're there. In the restaurant, we go as a consumer and we visit and then we go home. But at the meal table, there is belonging. There is belonging. And I want us to really look at that question of belonging in these coming few weeks, what it means to belong, how we connect and grow connection in a church community. Because too often our stories, when we've been part of churches, is I attended on Sunday for a while, but you know what? It never felt like family. Have you had that experience? I've been there, I've been coming for ages, I never felt like I belonged. There's got to be a transition from feeling like we are going somewhere to be served to going somewhere where we participate. And that's exactly what I want us to look at today. Now, before we go there, we need to take an honest look at our culture, because there's many, many descriptions for our culture, aren't there? There are many isms that are put on our culture, be it postmodernism or individualism or relativism or pluralism or whatever it might be. But one of the key ones that we need to look at in this conversation is consumerism. Consumerism. Some preempting that. Consumerism, according to all of our favorite source of information, i.e. Wikipedia, it is a social and economic order that encourages the acquisition of goods and services in ever increasing amounts. A working definition for us for how this operates at a personal level, not just a societal level, but for us, might go something like this. The acquisition of commodities that serve me unto the ends of my happiness and comfort. The acquisition of commodities that serve me unto the ends of my happiness and comfort. Those commodities might be material. They might be relational. They might be sexual. They might be intellectual. They might be entertainment. So much of our culture is geared towards how can I serve the things that I feel like I need in myself, towards our happiness and comfort. Ultimately, a consumerist society kind of trains us in a hedonistic pursuit of how can my happiness and fulfillment and well-being be met. And at the center of all this is me. How can everything in the world around me serve me, that I be comfortable and happy and well? Now, there's many critiques of consumerism. We could talk about the impact on the environment. We could talk about the widening gap between rich and poor. But for us, we need to, as Christians and as disciples in the way of Jesus, we also need to recognize that to live a consumerist way ultimately damages our soul. Because humanity, we are told in the scriptures, we're not made to consume and to have the world and everything in it and everyone around us serve us, but rather that we were made for love, and love is always something which focuses on another. Augustine, a great Christian author and an early teacher in the church, said that sin is a life turned in on itself. A life turned in on itself. Consumerism turns our lives in on ourselves to say, what's in it for me? I will consume and consume and consume until I finally find happiness. Problem is, it never actually works. Jesus, on the stark contrast to this, spoke these radical words: whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. And it's a great image that's given to us of how this kind of impacts our spiritual life in the fantastic film WALL-E. Any WALL-E fans out there? WALL-E is a kind of projected animated film looking into the future where humanity is essentially consumed so much that we've destroyed our planet, filled it with rubbish. And so humans have left robots with a mass cleanup operation of planet Earth while humanity has gone off into a spaceship and lives in space, in this spaceship, in essentially a ridiculously comfortable existence. And the people look like this. They've basically formed these sort of like mobile chairs that they go-kart around in with these screens in front of their faces. They never really get up. They drive around in their little chairs, and everything is kind of geared towards their comfort and entertainment. And at one point in the movie, they show like an X-ray of the people, and these sort of fat globular blobs of people sitting in their chairs, their skeletons have gradually shrunk to the point of almost disappearing because they don't need them anymore because they never get up. And it's this like ridiculous but stark kind of illustration of actually how living this me-centered, comfort-centric lifestyle ultimately atrophies something in us. Because as a people, we were not made ultimately just to consume, but we were made to participate and to create. And the grafting that God does in our soul is to move us into activity and not passivity. Vicki Robbins, author of Your Money or Your Life, said, "We no longer live life, we consume it." We no longer live life, but we consume it. There's multiple problems to this, but one of the key problems that this brings to us is consumerism ultimately leads us to be passive. We sit at the restaurant of our culture and we don't like something about this. The food wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. And so we offer a little bit of feedback. But none of us in our right mind would get up and go into the kitchen and start adding a few different spices or special sauces to the food. We don't contribute, but we sit back and we critique. A consumer society always leaves us moving from the place of I want to participate in this thing to I'm going to passively criticize what is going on around me. And actually, when we step back and look at the world around us, so often that's what we see, right? We look on social media, and so often what's happening is people are complaining about the state of the world, but how often do we say, what could we do about it? So often we want to give our opinion on something or criticize something or say it shouldn't be like this, but actually the invitation of humanity is always to create something better. Mark Sayers, in his brilliant book, Reappearing Church, writes these words: We are shaped by the passive-aggressive tone of consumerism, where we want maximum say with minimum responsibility. We are shaped primarily by our fluid and ever-shifting feelings. We yearn for community and connection, yet fear commitment and consistency. We wish for justice while desiring hedonistic payoffs. We religiously point the finger at others while jealously guarding our own right to do as we please. All these factors place us in a spiritually precarious place. We are shaped by a culture of consumerism and spectatorship. We expect to be able to lob our opinion into any situation. We favor rights over responsibility. Christ has given us authority. The Spirit is with us, yet we must choose to move from a posture of passivity into proactivity, taking the hand of God as he leads us into his kingdom. Anyone feeling uplifted so far today? We've got a little bit further to go before we find the hope and the vision that Jesus brings into this moment. Because actually, we in this place of recognizing that this is a real part of our society, in a real way that much of the world has gone, to shape us into a people who expect actually to have what we need and what will serve our joy and our happiness in every moment at the click of a button. In this place, we need to recognize that also can infect how we think about the church. And consumerism can become an attitude towards church community too. Subtly, our question about church can become, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? Do you remember our definition? The acquisition of commodities that serve me unto the ends of my happiness and comfort. Have you asked those questions? Does the worship suit my preferences? Or does the teaching make me feel good? Is there community or leadership that meets my needs? Do I like the church's branding? Or that crucial question that all of us ask, is there good coffee in this place? It's so easy to start subtly asking those questions of how well is this place serving my needs? But the devastating and crucial thing that we just need to realize is that when we act as consumers and think as consumers and walk and feel and talk as consumers, actually we can never truly belong. We can never truly belong. Consumers can't belong. You can't belong when you go to Burger King or when you go to Starbucks or where we go to consume things from the world, but you belong when we move from the restaurant to family, where we participate. And the movement, the invitation for us in this moment is to say, okay, we recognize that our society has these characteristics, and we recognize that sometimes this has become the way of the church. And sometimes as church, we have played to that and we've tried to make it look better and feel better and sound better and meet the needs, rather than calling one another into the radical discipleship vision of Jesus. But maybe he dreamed of something better. Maybe he dreamed of something better. There's a beautiful verse in the New Testament. It's in Acts chapter 2, verse 42. And it's one that we've gone back to quite a few times at Anchor. And it's just after the church has been birthed. The Spirit has fallen on the church at Pentecost. He's come like a wind and fire. And a group of timid people hiding in a room have burst out onto the streets and have shared the good news of Jesus to the waiting crowds. And after this, 3,000 are added to their number. And they suddenly become this way larger community of people. And we read immediately after this what they look like. And we read these words. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. I want to zone in on one word in there, fellowship. It's a Greek word, koinonia. We translate this often as fellowship, but actually the literal meaning of it is a little bit broader. It has a sense not just of fellowship, which is nice community, but very specifically, it has the sense of joint participation. joint participation. Like, this isn't just a community which is where I have relationships, but rather this is somewhere we come together to do something together. To be koinonia in the New Testament is not just to have friendships in a place, but rather it is in some way to gather around a cause where we all become participants together unto the same ends. To be koinonia means that we belong because we contribute. To be koinonia means that we are not a restaurant, Bristol Lido, but we are a family meal table where everyone brings something, where everyone contributes, and where everyone is a part of this. Jesus' vision, as we look at the New Testament, always came down to this, that he didn't view discipleship or church to be a kind of split level thing between those who participate and contribute and those who merely attend and watch from a distance. Rather, he invited every single disciple to come onto the field, to get their boots on and to join in. The vision of koinonia, Jesus' church, is of communal participation where everybody gets to play. Now, we're going to get to our reading today. It's taken a little bit of time to get there, hasn't it? But let's turn back, if you will, to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, because we want to have a look at these words, because they are maybe some of the clearest teaching in the scriptures around how this koinonia, this community of God, works and operates. And it's right in the middle of this teaching that Paul is wanting to give around spiritual gifts and church community. I'm going to read it to us again because the words are key, and we've had a bit more of an introduction now. So let's go through them again, starting from verse 12. It goes like this. Just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, i.e. ethnic distinctions, slave or free social distinctions, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of one part, but of many. Now, if the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being a part of the body. If the whole body, he says, intentionally, I think, being humorous, were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. Let's keep going. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. And the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. And the parts that are unpresentable, I love his very careful terminology around that. We're coming back to that in a minute. Are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. But God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for one another. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Now you, he says to the Corinthian church, and again these words resound for us, Anchor Church today, you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. Each one of you is a part of it. I'm going to put out three really quick things, really super simple things that are just blazingly obvious from this passage before we then look at how we apply it in our moment today. Firstly, unity. Paul says that we are one body. We, plural, are one body continuing the mission of Jesus in Birmingham today. The book of Acts starts by saying in the previous books, in the Gospels, we have learned about what Jesus started to do, but now he continues to do a work, and he does it through his body, us, in the city today. We have a united cause. We are filled with a one Spirit who fills each one of us. We have one Lord. We are baptized into one family. We begin with a simple name upon us that we are one. We are one. We are one family. We begin as a people. We are not lots of different individuals doing lots of different things, but we are lots of different individuals all contending for the same cause of Jesus' lordship and that his kingdom may come in this city. But two, diversity. Paul is so clear on this. The fact that we are called to one mission does not negate the fact that we all bring beautiful diversity to this vision. Each one of us is stacked full of different skills, gifts, experience, passions, and longing. And Paul celebrates that. He absolutely celebrates that. He loves it. Jesus loves it. God has created us for that. Your individuality, your nuance, the strengths that he has inscribed that are only there in you were intentionally put there to contribute within this thing called the body of Jesus. When he put you together, the scripture says, you were fearfully and wonderfully made. He knows what he was doing, and he knows what he has inscribed within you. Every single one of us has something unique to contribute. And the third thing that is just so clear, and Paul is so keen to get across, is that there is no hierarchy of value in this body. This is one that we maybe need to hear most obviously, because we love a hierarchy of value, right? We walk into a situation and we're often just asking, even subtly, who's the most important? Who's ranking high in this place? But Paul's having absolutely none of it. Paul is having none of it. He is saying to us, you all bring something so crucial, and to say who is more important in this place is as ridiculous as say, are your eyes or your ears more important? Every single part of this needs to be present and working together. This means that there is no pride for us in our gifting. It means that some of us who think, actually, I've got gifts that I think are pretty special in this place. Paul is saying, wait a minute. No, you have equal gifts in this place. They're beautiful, they're good, they're of God, but they are of equal value. And maybe more commonly, there's no insecurity in our gifting. I think often in church cultures, we sort of assume that the greater gifts are reserved for those who use microphones and wear skinny jeans, right? But actually, in the economics of God, every single person who is called to be in the body of Jesus carries something of utterly equal worth, whether it is seen or not seen. Too often what we have done for ourselves is we have reduced the validity of our contribution, whereas Jesus and Paul in this text want to say what you carry is unique and crucial, and without you, the body of Jesus is going to be missing something that it needs. It will be like a body which is missing an eye. It'll be like a body that is missing its liver. It will be like a body that's missing its hand. You bring something so crucial, and without you bringing it, whether you think it is something that is to be elevated or not, doesn't matter. Without you there, we're missing out. You have to be present there. I love that little phrase in verse 23, the parts that are unpresentable. The Greek word means lacking a pleasing form, or as one older translation puts it, are unseemly members. We'll leave it to the imagination for which parts Paul is talking about. But I kind of love that he goes there. Like, actually, we have this sort of hierarchy of value which we can even place to our own bodies. And Paul is saying, actually, there's things which we might even think in church of hiding away. But let me tell you, there is equal value upon each one of you. There is no hierarchy of value in this place. Unity, diversity, and no hierarchy of values. We cannot put these on each other, and we cannot put them on ourselves. So, practically, becoming koinonia. We are in this moment right now, as we are, with a number of you guys who have been with us since the beginning of our time as Anchor, 2 3/4-ish years ago when we planted. There are people who have joined recently. There are some of you guys who are just exploring. But in this moment, I just want to just look practically this week and then in the couple of weeks to come about how we find our place within this thing, about how we move from the restaurant and the cultural temptation to be in the restaurant to increasingly becoming family, in the in the messy, crazy, real, honest place of the family meal table, where actually we all bring something crucial: unity, diversity, but everybody taking a part. And I want to say 4 things to us that might be helpful into this. They're not 4 exhaustive things, but they're 4 things that might be helpful for us today. So the first is this: we are all called to the city. We are all called to the city. I think there's a confusion sometimes that we have adapted around church and participation, that we've assumed that the only way you can participate is to do something on a rota on a Sunday. You know that vibe? We do have rotas on a Sunday. That's right. That's good. But our primary call as a Church of Jesus is to participate in the life that God is wanting to release in the city. And so each one of us, as we go into our week, every single week, is a part of that activity. Wherever we go to work, to say, how can we release the life and the wisdom and the goodness of God where we go? How can my giftings play out in my place of study, in my work in the hospital, in my work as a teacher, among my family? How can I bring into that place the life and the vision and goodness of God? This is not something we go off and forget about each other as we do it, but rather it is a mission that we carry together. Just as Jesus sent his disciples out in twos to then report back, when we go out into our week, we disperse to the city to bring the blessing and life of God before we come back together. The primary call upon each one of us is to be the light on the hill, to be the salt in the earth, and to bring the goodness and life of God wherever we go. Leslie Newbigin, great missiologist, writing in Birmingham, wrote these words: the primary action of the church in the world, the primary action of the church in the world is the action of its members in their daily work. You don't use your spiritual gifts on a Sunday and then forget about them on Monday morning. Rather, we carry into the week the supernatural gifting of God into all that we do. Now, some of you guys have giftings that are particularly city focused. We've been intentional around trying to craft this as part of our leadership team and conversations. There are some people on our leadership team that when we start talking in the week, and we start talking, because we have to do some of this, about the rotas, etc. on Sunday, I start to see them get a bit fidgety. And they're like, I don't really want to be talking about this, because I don't want to be talking about rotas and stuff for Sunday. I want to get out there into the city, and I want to see the lost come to know Jesus, and I want to see justice come into place of injustice, and I want to see love of God into the brokenness of the city. And you see them getting agitated. I love that. I love that. We need that. If that is you, and you just are thinking about, like, what is your place of participation in the life of God, and you have those gifts and that heart and that energy which points you primarily outwards, hear this: we want to bless that and release it and resource it. When we're looking for how can we connect people in with what they're called to do, we intentionally have a number of places that we can connect, which are all about the outward focus. And if you carry something in you as well that is for a way of serving the city that we're not yet doing, come and tell us about it, because it may just be that you're carrying something that we need to start. The yearning of God's people should always be pointing outwards. And so if you are here today, my heart in sharing this message, and I wanted to name this because the worst thing for you, if that's what you are really carrying, that fire to get out of the building, would be to come and just sign up to a rota dutifully, but it'd be slow death to your soul. If you are called primarily into how can I just run into the radical work of the city, then we bless it and we say, go for it and take us with you. We love that. However, let's go on to the second thing, the common good. There is a specific also set of gifts that Paul speaks about, where we actually serve one another for what he calls the common good. In 1 Corinthians 12, verse 7, as just before our passage, he said this: to each one, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common goods. There are gifts that God has put in his people that are there to serve and encourage and enable and bless and train and grow each other. God has gifted his people that we each carry something which is towards the healing and blessing and life of those sitting around you. God, and then the list that Paul goes on to, speaking to so many of these places, encouragement, the prophetic, gifts of healing, gifts of leadership, gifts of teaching, the gifts of wisdom. There's so many ways that the Spirit just wants us to bless and to grow each other. Hospitality, administration. Oh, thank God for that gift. But actually, the Lord wants us to be a people who build up each other and release each other into being. The giftings that God places on the church are there for the common good. Once again, we remember this vision of the body. That when we don't bring what God has placed in our heart and placed in our lives to do, then actually the whole body suffers for it. Actually, when each one of us says, okay, I'm carrying something here. I'm carrying something in worship. I'm carrying something of encouragement. I'm carrying a pastoral vision. I'm carrying an administrative gifting. I'm carrying a gift of hospitality. When we bring those things, imperfect though we may feel we are in them, the body is built up. The people of God are nourished, and we become more clearly and more beautifully what God is calling us to be. Third thing is this: watch your places of frustration. Does anyone ever get a bit frustrated with church? Yeah. Few of us, I think if we were honest, probably a few more than nodded their heads right then. It's annoying, isn't it, church, sometimes? Because we kind of are like, we know it should be absolutely amazing, but so often it just seems so flawed. And I just, maybe it's partly because of what I do, but I just feel like I've had so many evenings, meals with friends, walks with friends, conversations with friends, where actually the topic of conversation has turned to church. And often what you find you're talking about is a feeling of what they feel like we are lacking rather than what they are feeling blessed by. I mean, obviously this isn't true of Anchor. I mean, of the Anchor side. But actually, so often our experience is frustration, right? I want to say to us today, watch your places of frustration. Because sometimes hidden in your frustration is actually your vocation and your gifting. And as we listen to those places where we feel what's going on with this frustration, often it's because we can see there's a distance between what the church could be in a certain area and where it currently is. And it may be that you are feeling like there's just a lack of connection in this place. There's a lack of community in this place. Maybe that means that we, like the consumerists, step back and remain a passive critic. Or maybe it is that God has inscribed gifts of being a pastor, of hospitality, of building community in you. Maybe you can feel like actually sometimes the worship, it feels a little bit performative or whatever it is. Maybe God has inscribed gifts in you of discernment or of worship leading. Maybe you feel like the teaching in this place, man, that Chris doesn't got a clue what he's doing. Maybe God's inscribed in you the gift of teaching. Maybe there's something bubbling up in you, in your place of frustration, which is actually the Spirit has put vision in your soul to say, I want you to build something different. We could go on and we could go on and we could go on. Michelangelo, that great painter and sculptor of the Renaissance, said, critique by creating. Critique by creating. I love that. I love that. We don't do that, do we? We tend to critique by critiquing. We tend to critique by sitting back and grumbling to ourselves or posting something on Facebook or whatever it might be. But actually, Michelangelo, and I think the way of Jesus is so often to say, I feel frustrated by something, but rather than just sitting in my frustration in a place of passivity, I want to bring something because maybe the Lord has hidden something in this frustration that is a vocation. Because within our frustration is so often vision of what the church can be. And the fourth thing I'll just briefly say before we land is start serving. Now, I'm looking around the room and I'm like, so many people are just doing so many beautiful, amazing things in this place already. And just giving just our time and our gifts and our skills and all of those things. Some of you, truth be told, are probably doing a little bit too much and probably could do with having a bit more of a break. But I think there's probably some of us as well who are holding back and who call this place home, but actually just feel that kind of reticence to take that extra step. And it might be a fear of like commitment. That can feel hard. When you start serving, it's like, okay, I'm in now. And it's a bit easier not to be there quite yet. For some of us, it might be actually we undervalue the contribution that God has written into our soul that he wants us to bring. And we do what Paul says not to do. And we start saying, my contribution in the body is not valuable. It's not valid. The body doesn't need this part. Actually, the scriptures and Jesus says, yes, we do. It might be actually you're coming out of a place of pain because you have been overworked or over-demanded of in a previous church culture, where you have been seen for only as being valid or valuable because of what you could contribute rather than who you are. If that's your story, I'm really sorry that's been the case for you, because that's just too often a story. But there's a move that needs to happen from the people of God as we learn how to belong together, to recognize that in a family, in a body, where we are connected to one another, where we do life together, you have something so valid to bring. Start serving. You may not know quite what to do. Pick something, try something. So often we learn what God has gifted us to do as we start doing something. And you might be like, okay, I'm going to try doing relay and start serving with the kids and think, this is hell on earth. Why did I sign up for this team? This is not my skill at all. But discern within that, actually, I think I've got a vocation more towards prayer. Then come and join in the prayer life. So you can, that whole thing about you can steer a moving ship when it's moving. Didn't say that quite right. But actually, sometimes you've got to take the first step. And actually, as you start stepping out, actually, it's in that process of starting to serve that we discern more of what God has placed in us. Come and join in. Come and join in. We're an imperfect bunch of people, discerning what the Lord has inscribed into our lives. And we are so much poorer when we don't have the full body of Jesus participating in what God is doing here. There's a website up on the screen there, cunningly placed up there, anchorchurch.uk/serve. I'm going to say more about that in a minute. But we're in, I think we just, as leadership and as I've just been praying into this season and this moment for us, and with a number of you guys who've connected with us specifically in the past 6 months, 9 months and so on, but maybe haven't had a chance to find your place yet. We wanted to have a moment and a few weeks here where we just explore how we can grow and serve together. Because each one of you has something so crucial. And each one of your growth as a disciple of Jesus will happen as you also learn to exercise the gifts that he is working out in you. Here's, if you go to that web link, this is the list of things that will come up. It's an early and initial list of some things that's happening in Anchor. Some of these break down into multiple different teams. And if you read through that and think, actually, none of those are quite me, then come and talk to me, because we would love to hear what God might be brewing in you to release as something new. I'm going to finish with a quote by a guy called Pete Scazzaro, who wrote a book called Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, which is excellent. He wrote these words: "In a church culture that changes lives, people reject cultural values that view human beings as spectators and consumers. They affirm that every believer is called to full-time ministry for Jesus. Every sphere of daily activity, paid or unpaid work or retirement, constitutes a field of ministry. They refuse to compartmentalize work and spirituality, viewing work as an act of worship that brings order out of chaos and builds God's kingdom." All of us have a crucial part to play in what Jesus is working out in this city. And these few weeks, we're essentially saying, let's discern what that is together and as individuals, and let's join him.